All right, Franny Block, as promised, is here with us to talk about her latest story on the Democrats fighting for school choice in Kentucky. Franny, thanks for joining us. Very good story. The weird thing about that lead-in is Democrats fighting for school choice. I don't recall that happening very much, although I did live in D.C. at a time when Michelle Rhee was the head of schools there, and she was a Democrat, and that caused a huge tumult. What is going on in Kentucky?
So I think Kentucky is kind of a part of what the Free Press has reported on a lot, which is this idea of the Great Scramble. And so school choice is a policy across the country that has been championed by conservatives. But when you go into a state like Kentucky, what you see is that in urban areas where the school districts, the public schools, are not very good, and they're particularly impacting Black families and poor families, those are the people that want school choice, and those are people that are historically Democrats. Meanwhile, if you go into rural areas in Kentucky and you talk to superintendents like I did, who, that is Trump country. The one county I went to, 85% of people voted for Trump in the last election, yet many people don't want school choice. They say, our schools are good, please leave the funding alone, don't mess with it, we don't want to lose any funding because it's going to be siphoned away to private schools in the urban areas.
And their schools might, in fact, be good, right? But the issue is not that. I mean, when you looked at this, and I'm putting you on the spot here, you might not know this, but what is the breakdown of support amongst certain minority groups, Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, for school choice? Because that in the past was always the beginning of the scramble for me, because you saw the teachers unions really hating this stuff, these Democratic areas saying no school choice here, but then you polled people in Black neighborhoods and they were like, our schools are terrible, you mean we can get portable money and have great educations like these white people? And they were really supportive. I mean, what did you find when you were looking at that, that scramble as it is? Like, the support is there amongst certain minority groups, right?
Yeah. It's interesting. There's actually no polling in Kentucky about this ballot measure, which I found really strange considering it's a super contentious issue and probably one of the biggest issues on the ballot for Kentucky this November. But when you poll kind of the United States as a whole, you do start to see that not just Republicans, but Democrats and independents also overwhelmingly support the idea of school choice.
Really?
So it is not, I wrote another story a few weeks ago about this trend in Florida popping up of micro-schooling, kind of this return to the one-room schoolhouse. And again, people supported school choice so that they could enroll their kids in these micro-schools. And that was regardless of where they fell ideologically or politically.
Did you find any kind of consistent breakdown in the people that you spoke to of how people would fall on this measure? Because I think what Michael's pointing to is it's something I've obviously encountered here in New York. Our public school system in New York City is more segregated than Alabama's. Did you guys know that?
Wow.
And we spend so much money per kid, and so many of the kids in public schools who are getting a good education are white or Asian or in these sort of specialized schools, and so many of the Black and Hispanic kids are getting just a terrible education despite the fact that we spend, I think, the highest amount per child. But then when you talk, exactly like you said, Michael, you go into poor communities, Black parents want choice for their kids, but then you have this sort of white progressive movement putting the kibosh on that and saying, no, all the money is to stay in the public schools, right, out of this kind of virtue signal. Did you find any consistent breakdown in the people that you spoke to that would predict one way or the other?
I mean, it's a great point. I think at the end of the day, when I was in Louisville in the West End, which is the poorest neighborhood in Louisville, the parents I spoke to there, those were the parents that were saying, I'm putting my kids in these private schools to save them. I want school choice to save my kids because otherwise I don't know what's going to happen to them in the public schools and I'm worried for them. Again, when I went then into the rural counties, I'm talking to people who are working in the school district. Those are people that are worried about losing their jobs, people who are worried about their friends losing their jobs. And so then I think that puts an entirely different perspective on the issue as well. And then when I went and talked to the head of the teachers union in Kentucky, obviously he's against school choice. And he said something that I thought was very interesting. He said, parents in Kentucky do have a choice. They can send their kids to private schools. I think what he left out of that is that only if they can afford it.
Right. And how are the public schools in Kentucky? Are they?
So Kentucky ranks, I think, about 29th in the state. So they're not the worst, they're not the best. But what I will say is that in Jefferson County, which is where Louisville is, the majority, the state recently released its test scores, and they kind of gave the top 10 and the top worst in elementary, middle, and high school. And the majority of the worst schools were all in Jefferson County, all in the poorest neighborhoods of Louisville. So there clearly is a divide, and the schools in Louisville and in the urban counties are struggling more than those rural schools are. You know, on the other side of that, I went to Rockcastle County, a rural county. Their elementary school was the second best elementary school in the state. And so I think there's a lot of different factors as to why that is. There's been a lot of research about, for example, two-parent households being a big impact on that, perhaps teachers' unions having an impact on that in the cities versus in rural counties. So there's a lot of different theories, but that is what's happening.
I want to point something out here to the comment from the union official that you spoke to. This is especially bad in Chicago. If you look at what's going on in Chicago, there's a bunch of great reporting on this. There's a great documentary about this too, about how the teachers' unions have kind of, control politics in Chicago in a lot of ways. The head of the union, and I have to look up her name, Stacey Davis Gates, who has said that school choice is for racists. This is what she quote for racists. Was revealed to send her child to a private school. That was revealed last year, unsurprising. And she said, "Well, the circumstances, not for thee, but for me," kind of thing. And when somebody says that, you do have a choice. The head of the teachers union in Chicago has a bit of money in her pocket and can do this, and that desire is there for all of these parents to do so. When you talk to people in the union, what is the general union argument? So for people who don't understand this, you say well, that just seems like a logical, natural thing. Allow these kids, particularly poor kids who get the worst education in the worst areas, why wouldn't we allow them to do that? What is the teachers union argument that we shouldn't be doing that?
So the teachers union states that the pot, basically the money for education in Kentucky, is only so big. And when you do look at states that have passed very comprehensive school choice plans like Florida, you do tend to see that the majority of people receiving money from the state, whether you want to call it a voucher or not, are people that were already enrolled in private schools to begin with. So the idea that the teachers union is saying is, listen, if the pot is only so big, there's going to be people that are not being educated by the public schools right now that are now going to be draining money from the public schools anyway. And so that is the argument, again, that I also got when I went to the rural counties, is essentially they're saying, we're going to lose money. Our budget is going to lose money. And there's a progressive think tank in Kentucky that's put out a study saying that they're going to lose like $60 million or something really crazy. Or I can't even remember the number, but it would account to at least 60 jobs being lost in the county is the projection. And they're saying that money is basically going to go towards vouchers or whatever you want to call it for students that are already enrolled in private schools in Lexington and in Louisville. Yeah. And so that's their argument.
I want to say that there is a progressive argument to prevent school choice because it is equalized my salary with everybody else's in New York City because I've sent my daughter to private school. So now I have no money. I'm broke because of this. I pay money into this black hole of tax money in New York City, but I don't get to use the schools here because there's a lottery system. The people who watch this, and this is true when you work at the Free Press and you do stuff about kids, parenting, or schools, and people lose their minds because these are the hard things about life. You have a child and you're trying to figure out where she should go to school. You give all this money into, if I had the opportunity to not spend 50% of everything that I earn on a private school because I care about my child, I want her to have a good education, and I had that portable money, yes, I would use it. And yes, I would take it outside the district that I'm in because the district is terrible, right? That type of thing, us kind of libertarianish types love, because it's introducing competition into schools. Because the schools that don't have any competition are allowed to atrophy and provide terrible educations to kids for as long as they've been doing so in New York City. So.